everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Allison Ritz. I am the Director of Product Marketing at Visible Thread. So excited to have you here today for our webinar, Mastering Prompt Engineering, Real-World Applications and Techniques for Proposal Professionals. So just to give you an overview of what we are going to cover today, we're going to talk a little bit about the basics, do a quick review on the basic components of a prompt, best practices, and then we're going to jump into prompting types. I know in the description talked a little bit about types of prompts, so we'll talk about prompting types and different applications. So applications for real world scenarios that you may encounter during the proposal process. We'll also look at some examples. So look at some example basic prompts, expanded prompts, and then we will do a live example at the end. I'll jump into the Visible Thread platform and do a live example using some reference documents so you can see what that would look like in practice. So again, excited for everybody to join us, and thank you so much for being here, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the goals of the session in the front end. So do a quick overview of the goals of the session, and then we're going to review, effective structure, best practices to just kind of revisit our baseline. Then talk about our types of prompts application, some of those expanded examples, and then there will be time at the end for questions. There'll be time at the end for anything that you want to share, anything you want to expand upon, and then as always, we will be following up and we can one-on-one any questions after you connect with me on LinkedIn, or any of our folks here at Visible Thread will be happy to answer any questions that you have or point you in the right direction. All right, so kind of jumping into goals. So what can we expect from today's session? So really we want to understand different prompt types. I know that we have folks on the line likely who are at different levels. So some may be brand new to leveraging an LLM and creating content with generative AI, and some may be a bit more advanced. Regardless, we want to talk about different prompt types, and that's always helpful to look at different positioning and different ways that you can leverage generative AI to help in the process. Everybody knows about content creation. We will talk about that a bit, but then talk a little bit about, idea generation, using generative AI as another, sounding board, another idea person in the room, person in the conversation as you work through team reviews and that type of thing. So just want to kind of expand the way that we talk about usage and understand different types of prompts and how to leverage the platform in those types of ways. So then talk about iterating. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but just always something to keep in mind is iteration. So it is very unlikely, unless it is a very basic question or very basic situation, that you would go in, prompt any platform and get a kind of canned response that would be right out of the gate. So really the idea is to make that collaborative. So I look at Gen AI and content creation from that aspect as a, as an assistant, not a replacement. So you're looking for someone to assist in the process, get you off the blank page, and help to generate ideas. So talk a little bit about iteration, why that's important, and how it's always going to be part of the process. Again, we're going to look at several examples, and then talk about takeaway prompts. So the reference this in an article that I wrote, reference this in our materials leading up to this webinar, that we will be supplying an Excel file that has kind of a foundation, so the prompts that we're going to use today that can be iterated on, and then some additional prompts. So that'll give you some baseline and a structure of what each of these prompt types is like. And you can use that as part of your prompt library, and you can use that in your kind of experimentation moving forward. And then we'll talk kind of briefly about the benefits of maintaining a prompt library, whether you do that through a system like Visible Thread or whether you're doing that on your own. Really important to make sure that you're creating prompts that are solid, that are well formulated, and that you can reuse as you're moving forward in your journey of content creation. So just some housekeeping items. You can go ahead, and if you have any questions throughout the process or throughout the presentation, you can go ahead and enter those in the Q&A. You can also ask questions in the chat, and then I'll make sure to cover as many as I can at the end and then follow up as well. Okay. So I want to do a quick overview and talk about key elements of an effective prompt. We're just going to quickly do an overview and then jump into our examples. So for those that are not familiar or may be a bit newer, prompt engineering is the term that's used when we're talking about, the combination of sort of the art and science, but really it's crafting the instructions for Gen AI tools to produce the outcome that you're looking for. So ultimately the prompt is the roadmap for the AI to create the most relevant response. So what you're looking for an output needs to go into your prompt, but it is important the way that you structure, the way that you give context, and the way that you provide the outline to the generative AI that you're using, regardless of what platform that might be. So talking about what are some things to remember and what are some things that are important? So think of these from a baseline perspective as we move into some of our examples and some of the more complex prompts that you may see later in our presentation. So make sure that we're always being clear and giving specific instructions. Now, if that is a simple one-off or a simple request up to a very complex prompt, so it can be multidimensional, it can be multifaceted, but we need to make sure that we're clear on what we're asking for and how all that information fits together and what we want an output to look like. So give specific instructions, communicate only what is essential, and avoid any ambiguity. So make sure that you're being very direct. I like to think of this as you're giving instructions to a group of students. So you're giving instructions, you want to make sure you have an exact idea of what you want that output to look like. They're going to get as close to that as possible if you give them specific instructions, avoid any gray areas. So think about and yes, I just saw this question pop up. We will be sharing the slides after the webinar along with all the prompt examples that we're using as well. So I like to think of this anytime you're automating, and this is a good rule of thumb, not just for creating content, but anytime you're automating manual processes. Imagine that you're going to do that manually, or imagine you're being asked to create a specific type of content. Where would you have any areas of confusion? What will be follow-up questions that you might ask? And how could you simplify the request? So just think of this as not this sort of, foreign idea, but I'm giving instructions to somebody to complete, or I'm being given these instructions. How would I want those to be presented in order for me to get as close as possible as to the initial request? So consider style and tone. So if you prefer professional tone, include that. Consider active versus passive voice, using open-ended questions versus specific questions. So really consider the style of what you're looking for, and we'll show a couple examples later on, but you can instruct that. So depending on the type of style, tone, structure that you're looking for, those can be good to direct as well. Context. Context is key. So specific instructions where you can. If you have specific things on formatting, length, structure, give those instructions. Now, anybody who has used Gen AI or created content in this way knows that you're not always going to get exactly what you're looking for. It's going to be some variation, but the more instruction you can give, the closer things will be. So if you want an intro paragraph, 3 body paragraphs with headings, subheadings, and you want a summary at the end, make sure that you give that instruction, because it might not be exact, but it will be much closer to what you're looking for than if you just kind of are very open-ended with what you want to look like. Explain any nuance. So any nuance that you want to be considered, be specific about what you want to include or exclude. And then level of analysis. Do you want this to be a summary, an overview, a deep dive into a certain topic? Just be clear about what you're looking for. And then consider the audience. So is this a how-to for new users? Is this, higher level technical or educational content? What is the level of our reader or evaluator, and how much do they know about the topic? So you can prompt about the intended audience. So ask the LLM to write for the intended audience include details about how this is going to be evaluated or how this is going to be scored or assessed. All of those things can factor into getting a more relevant and pinpointed response. So good rule of thumb, very basic rule of thumb, a good prompt generally does three things. So we have a task or question for the AI to perform, frames the context of your request, so adds additional context framing, and then gives any detail or constraints that are needed to create the most relevant output. So all of those things that we just discussed, make sure that you're clear on what you're looking for. So I'm looking for a blog post, I'm looking for a summary, I'm looking for an RFI response. I'm looking for technical volumes or specific answers to questions, the context, exactly what we need to contain, and ideas that we need to talk through or discover in our content. And then any relevant detail. So do we have any specific detail that you need to add? Are there any specific things you want to exclude? Audience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just make sure that anything you want, you will see there. So we're going to get into some examples, and then you will see a bunch of different ways that you can position that. But this is just a good kind of baseline when you're thinking about prompts to build on. So here's an example. I've used this example in a webinar previously, so I apologize, but it is a very easy sequential example if you've seen this one before. So talking about that structure in practice, so that basic structure in practice. So the example prompt is create an audit report on the safety of the Beaver Valley Power Station in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. So this is a nuclear power station. In this example, I gave instructions. So create an audit report. The context there is the location of the facility, the name of the facility. And then I can enhance my context, which we'll do in the next several prompts. So ultimately, I said, create an audit report. I asked for an audit report on safety. I gave the information on the location, and that was it. So yes, I can use reference documents in this situation, and that will scrub and give me an answer, but it's going to be very general, and it's probably going to take me some time to get down to exactly what I was looking for. So here I have create an audit report on the safety of the Beaver Valley Power Station in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. The recipient is the Department of Energy. So I gave the same instruction, same context, but then I have given my requesting agency. So we can factor in preferences of the requesting agency and then continue to enhance on this. So a better version of this prompt would be, let's add some focus. So same prompt, same Department of Energy. We want to focus on safety, quality, downtime, and environmental risk mitigation. Okay, so now we know where we want the AI to focus and what we're going to kind of dig into and what we need to outline when we're scouring our reference materials. So then additionally, to kind of put a bow on that and have it align with our, things that prompts must have, we're going to add output instructions. So everything is the same, but then we've just added the response must have headings for each focus and be less than 2,500 words. So ultimately, we've started with our initial prompt of create an audit report on the safety of the Beaver Valley Power Station, ended with create an audit report, the recipient's the Department of Energy, the report needs to focus on safety, quality, downtime, and environmental risk mitigation, and the response must have headings for each focus and be less than 2,500 words. So you can see if we're thinking about the quality of a first draft, because that's the goal when you are running prompts and creating first draft content, is get to the highest level of quality you can with the first draft and then work from there. So it's going to take less. If you can get 60% of the way there instead of 30% of the way there, there's a lot less kind of massaging and iteration than you need to do. So the better the prompt, the more context you give, the closer you can get in your first pass. So I want to talk about types of prompts and applications. So beyond our initial baseline, so keep that in the back of your mind of what the prompt needs to contain and what a good kind of communication flow looks like. And now we'll talk about some specific prompts and what that looks like and how they can be applied. So different use cases and different pieces here. All right. I think I have, and I do. I had one funky slide in there, so I apologize for that. We'll skip past that. So the first one that I want to cover is instructional prompts. So ultimately, instructional prompts provide clear, concise commands. So the more context you provide, the more relevant the content is going to be. So you're looking to remove ambiguity, you're giving a focused objective to the AI in this situation. So some characteristics. Clearly states exactly what the AI should accomplish. Concise, brief, to the point. You want to avoid unnecessary details or making this overly complex. And then it's action oriented. So write, summarize, analyze. So it's specific guiding tasks here as well. So ultimately, looking at best practices. So we want to improve, if you want to improve kind of the quality and relevancy of the output here, we want to use clear instructions. So this is kind of a natural next step of our basic prompting. So we want clear instructions, we want to define specific context, and use action verbs for our desired output. So looking at an example. So my example here is a basic example of a prompt outline that can be recreated. So earlier I talked about prompt library and creating baseline prompts. This is a good best practice in any situation, regardless of if you're using a platform that's going to assist you with that, or if this is just a personal, document that you keep with some prompt outlines that work well for you. So a situation like this, an example would be create a 2,000 word executive summary for XYZ proposal. So this, in that situation, obviously can be modified or changed for different proposals. So you kind of have these fields that are a bit dynamic that you can cycle in and out. So the document must have sections outlining the customer's needs, our proposed solution, key benefits, and highlighting ABC company's capabilities. So ultimately, what we're looking at here is a good framework for giving you this type of output. Now, I've created an example prompt here. So I'm doing 5 different types of prompts today in this webinar, and I've created visible thread version. So if this is because on the visible thread side of the house, we also respond to proposals and bid on work. So looking at how we would use that in this specific situation, and this will be an RFP acquisition. So I said, create a 2,000 word executive summary for the RFP software acquisition proposal. The summary must outline the customer's need for automated requirements identification, contractual risk assessment, past performance assessment, and content management. Highlight how VT can effectively satisfy each need and our differentiators. Please create a section for each need with subsections for the customer's need, how Visible Thread will solve it, and our differentiators relative to the task. And please include an overview paragraph discussing our technical approach. So while this seems like a much more complicated prompt or a much more involved prompt than some of the basic front end ones that we'll see, task, context, length, the ones that we saw in the previous example, it is a similar approach. So we've given specific instructions on what we're looking for. So what we're looking for, we want a 2,000 word executive summary. We have specific instructions on what we need to outline, what those sections need to look like, and what each section needs to contain, and the analysis that needs to be done within. Now, this is a great example of we can generate content and then expand on those things. So for our categories, requirements identification, contractual risk assessment, past performance assessment, we can expand upon those with iteration prompts as we move and work through that. And I am going to pull one of these out and do a live example at the end. But this just gives you an idea of, if we're talking about a instructional prompt, the different ways that that can be presented, and how you can take a baseline, this example prompt, and then expand upon that for different opportunities or different outcomes. So what is the best use for all of this? So ultimately, practical applications are going to be proposal content, Q&As, RFI content, summaries, process documentation. So these are situations where we have a very defined idea of what our output needs to look like and what it needs to contain. So this is a good structure in those situations. So a summary, so if we're condensing long text or complex topics into digestible kind of bite-sized pieces or doing overall summaries, factual explanations, so clear, accurate explanations, definitions, and then structured output. So if we want to generate lists, outlines, reports, instructions, these are great for documenting processes and that type of thing. So those are some kind of practical applications and where they would fit in the process. So moving on, talking about contextual prompts. So contextual prompts are specific instructions, statements that are going to provide background information, establish a scenario, perspective, or kind of expertise that the AI should adopt when responding. So just like the name, you're adding additional context and additional framing to the request. So here you're wanting to ensure that the AI is going to deliver a response that's more accurate, detailed, relevant than a more general or basic response. So similar to instructional prompts, but add more context. So we want to make sure, again, that we're clearly defining context. So providing additional specificity and then an audience can improve the quality of the content you're generating. Background information, constraints, and then be very direct on what you're looking to accomplish. So best practices here would be, determining the specific kind of knowledge domain or viewpoint that best matches the query. So if you're looking at this from an engineering perspective or from an evaluator's perspective, however you're coming in, you want to frame that and take that lens and make sure the AI is clear on the role that they want to adopt, and then additional nuance that you want to include. So if there's additional nuance that you want to include when it comes to the things that are going to be weighted the most in an evaluation or information that's most crucial to a customer's need, you can outline that as well. So looking at an example, so this is another kind of basic prompt, and then I've created a more specific version so you can see what that looks like in practice. So our example is you're a solution engineer. So we have given a role to we've given a role to the AI, so context for the AI to use when assessing. So create an offering for XYZ company, highlighting our capabilities and addressing customer need A, customer need B, and customer need C. The response should use technical language, but not be overly complex. The response needs to be customer-centric and focus on how our solution will solve problem A and problem B. So in practice, what does that look like? You're a solution engineer at Visible Thread. Create an offering for the Department of Homeland Security, highlighting the core competencies, of the VT Writer platform. Create a section with a heading, summary, and bulleted directives on how Visible Thread will address writing quality, consistency of messaging, and adhering to agency-style guides to support one-voice initiatives. Additionally, add a section explaining how VT Insights will generate and provide data to support the platform's effectiveness at addressing these key needs. The response should be customer-centric and focus on how VT Writer will improve overall writing quality. So again, directives similar to our similar to our last example, directives on exactly what we're looking for, what the context needs to be, what our structure needs to be. But we have now assigned a role, given more information about our customer, and added context around what we're looking for. So when we're talking about being customer-centric, it is important to the customer to address the needs. So writing quality, consistency, adhering to style guides, and agency terminology. They have one voice initiative, and we're looking at effectiveness in addressing these needs. So we've given a role and then more context, and then we want to talk about data support and how we're going to kind of prove that out. And just for everyone, this is all of these scenarios that I've created on the Visible Thread side are just made up for these examples. These aren't specific things that we're working on. Okay. So moving on, talking about comparative prompts. So moving into a little bit different of an analysis perspective, or moving into a little bit of a different assessment perspective. So rather than just blanket content creation or content creation for a purpose, we're talking about doing some analysis. So I really like to think about leveraging AI for idea generation, for comparative analysis. It's an excellent fit. So these are some ways that you can do that. And regardless of the type of platform that you're using, these things are relevant in different areas. So you may be using a specific type of platform to generate content, but you might be using another type of research platform to do market research or comparative analysis. So these are the types of structures that you can use in both areas, but it's good to think about the output and the platform that you're using when you think about what types of prompts will be most effective for the outcome that you're looking for. So comparative prompts are really focusing on asking the AI to assess, contrast, analyze two or more concepts. So here we're looking for more of an analysis than, okay, we just want to create content. Now, you can use a comparative prompt to create content ultimately that's going to be used at some point of your process, but you can also use it just for part of your analytic and review process. So we want to guide the AI to deliver structured comparisons, like a comprehensive look at nuanced differences and similarities of products or ideas. So these are really useful when you're thinking about decision making, planning, and then again, content creation as well. So we want to make sure the characteristics of this type of prompt, or that we're going to ask the AI to compare at least two items. So it can be multiple, but you need at least two things to compare. Ideas, solutions, outcomes, processes, etc. Identification of similarities and differences. So a lot of times in these types of prompts, we're looking for what are the differences, what are the positives and negatives, what does one have, what is one better at than the other, that type of thing. So working through identifying the differences and then categorizing. And then sort of defining the why in the sense of it wants to see not just why is it different. So it's not just what are the differences between these two, why is that significant, and why is it impactful for the task at hand or the research at hand. So in order to do this effectively, we want to make sure that we're clearly defining the criteria for comparison. So are we comparing costs, efficiency? Are we comparing performance or scoring in certain areas? What are we looking at there? Encourage balanced assessment. So don't sway too far one way in the prompt or the structure of the prompt. So we're looking for a balanced assessment. You're going to get your best response if you are coming in from a neutral position. And then specific contexts or use cases. So you can call out specific products, specific use cases, specific items that you want to compare. So the more context that you can give there, the better. So looking at our example, very easy format. So analyze the differences in solution A and solution B, identify similarities and differences, and explain how each will solve customer problem A and customer problem B. So in this situation, we're looking for, there are two solutions. Tell me what's similar about them, tell me what's different, and how are each of them going to approach this problem. So what you'll see when we get that in the example I'm going to show you live is going to be a comparative prompt, and you'll see that naturally you do kind of take the next step when you define how are you going to solve customer A and customer problem B. It starts to break out why this is, which solution is more suited. So the prompt here, the prompt example is analyze the different approaches of VT Docs and VT Writer by referencing the core functionality of each platform. Identify similarities and differences and explain how each will address requirements analysis, past performance assessment, and written quality assessment. Please give an overview of how each platform will address each issue and then recommend which is better suited for the task. So we are going to work this live in the system. So I will skip on this because we'll talk a little bit more, but that's a good example of a real world scenario of using a comparative prompt. So a sequential prompt, I think these are really interesting because they are a bit more unique. I would say not used quite as often, but a way really to drill into specific ideas. So looking at sequential prompts, we're looking to take a more strategic approach to simplifying complex tasks. So we want to divide them into smaller, clearly defined steps. So this is something, if you have a much more nuanced question, a more complex query, this is a way to break that into smaller chunks and sort of follow the breadcrumbs to where you're looking to get. So it's unlikely in the front end that when we look at the example, that if we ask the last question with all of the context given, that you would get a very robust response. So this way, we're going to kind of stair step that and walk through a collaborative process with the AI. So some characteristics of this would be multi-step tasks. So we want to look at multi-step or complex processes or analysis. Make sure that it's broken down into bite-sized chunks, allowing to approach each step individually. So we want to simplify the process. And then with each step, you're refining on the last. So we're building on the output of the last step to get to a final answer. So it's just another way to approach this. Best practices here, we want to make sure that we're keeping our commands direct and using limited concept in each step. So not overcomplicating anything. Make sure that it logically builds on the previous output. So the previous answer that you were given or context you were given, we want to build upon that. And then correct course. So you can correct course here. That's the nice thing about you're working with something complex. A lot of times folks have trouble if you're creating big, complicated prompts and getting big, complicated answers that are very multifaceted. You can then begin to tackle those bit by bit. This is another way to kind of build to getting that more complicated answer. So it's just another approach. It really depends on what works best and how, with the type of queries and the type of information you're using, this is another way for you to approach it and may get a different response. So an example of this, in the example, I said, step one would be create a summary of the past performance of XYZ company related to delivery of product or service A. So one ask really, and then choose one past contract, and you can identify one past contract. So we're going to do a summary. We're going to identify a contract and then elaborate on where we best solved for problem A. So now we're digging in. So we have a summary of past performance. We've identified one contract and we want to talk about how we're solving for problem A. So we're going to run that query, and then so we've identified areas where we've solved for problem A. So in areas where we solve for problem A, did we also address problem B? Okay, then we're going to run that query. We have information about areas where we solve for problem A and we address problem B. And areas where we did solve for both problem A and problem B most effectively, in which areas did we solve for problem A and problem B most effectively, and what was the positioning of the solution in that offering? So ultimately, at the end, the question we were asking was, in which piece of our past performance did we solve for both A and B most effectively, and how did we position that? So that is a pretty complex ask if you're talking about, okay, I have a whole plethora of past performance that I want you to scan, and I want you to figure out where I solved for X, Y, and Z, and tell me where I did that most effectively and how I positioned it in that scenario. You may get incomplete responses. But if we attack it this way and say, okay, I'm looking for this product, breaking down into this problem or this specific ask, and then I want to expand on areas where I did both of these things. And then when I've found that, I want to see how I positioned those and what positioning was most effective. So it's just another way to work through this from an analytic perspective. Again, this is a way that you can. So from a use case perspective, you certainly can use sequential prompts for instructional guides, strategic planning and analysis, creating certain types of processes or a task delegation. But this is also an excellent when you're looking at project management, strategic planning, deeper analysis, and creative ideation. This is a really good way to use that as well. So another example of a different way that we can use use AI or use generative AI platforms beyond the general content creation. So my example here of this one, create a summary of projects in which a governmental agency used VT Writer. Choose a past contract, and in this situation, I should have identified a contract, and elaborate on where we best address the need for data reporting related to overall writing quality. In areas where we effectively address writing quality, did we also support one voicing initiatives? And then how did we deliver both data reporting and effectively improve writing quality? What was the positioning of that offering? So walking through the steps of what that would look like with real world examples. Okay, we're going to talk about one more example, and then I'm going to jump in to the platform and we'll show this live using reference documents of what that would look like. So the last one that we'll cover are collaborative prompts. So collaborative prompts are exactly what they say. So they are interactive inputs that encourage a more conversational partnership between users and AI. So you're looking to stimulate a creative exchange. So building on refined ideas through a more open dialogue. So more than directives, this is a more open-ended back and forth. So you're opening up for interpretation. So instead of, this is exactly what I want, this allows the AI to suggest potential approaches that you may not have previously considered. So you want to ensure that you do provide any nuance or additional considerations to get the most valuable results, but you also want to leave things a little bit open-ended. So it can help in this situation to do a role or persona and generate content from a specific perspective. You want to use this effectively, you want to clearly state your objectives and ensure alignment. So think about this again, if we're thinking about a manual process or how you would do this with a non-AI, with just somebody else on your team. If you're working through a brainstorming session or coming up with different ideas, you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with objectives and that you're aligned in that sense. So what's being generated is relevant. Be specific in follow-up questions to make sure that you're guiding in the direction that you want to go and helping to kind of continue to refine the conversation. So remain flexible. So you can't be too rigid on the output here, and you want to be as open and collaborative as in the process as you can, and just kind of let it organically move beyond your initial expectations. So in this instance, so practical applications for this obviously are idea generation, solution development, enhancement, solutioning when we're looking at creative when we're putting together a solutioning package, looking at creative options there, or from a positioning perspective, looking at creative options in that sense, design collaboration, scenario-based training development. Those are all good use cases. Also for refining messaging and creating content. So looking at, I'm putting together an offering, I want to make sure that I'm positioning effectively, that I'm differentiating myself in an effective way. It's a good way to sort of bounce ideas or perhaps expand the ideas that you have in place. So an excellent way to kind of flex the muscle of the AI and use it in a collaborative process. So quick example. I want to create an RFI to assess the market and understand available solutions for problem A and problem B. Suggest how I should structure the request. So I want to create an RFI to assess the market and understand what solutions are available to help my team manage bids and pipelines more effectively. How should I structure the request, and what aspects of those platforms would be most helpful for a team of my size? Now I stopped that because I didn't want to get too into the weeds, but that can go on. So what would be most helpful if we are focused on X, Y, and Z? So really we're generating ideas. We're looking for a back and forth sort of conversation. So here, if I were to run this and generate, I would get examples, and then I could elaborate on those. So if it mentioned X platform is excellent at doing this, and this is why it's good for teams of this size and what benefits they have. You can then begin to expand upon those things. Also from, positioning, also from a market research perspective. So excellent way to use it in this capacity. So we want to jump into the Visible Thread platform quickly. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to make sure I'm effectively logged in here and then share my screen. And I want to work through one of our examples to show you what that would look like in practice, how you can reference documents. Now, this is obviously a Visible Thread example, but similar process if you're talking about referencing documents and how you would structure a request. But just to give you an idea of what it looks like within Visible Thread, how we manage prompts, and then how we manage reference materials. But this will give you an idea of what that would look like in practice. Okay. Well, let me share my screen. All right. Okay. So what we're looking at here is the home screen of VT Writer. For those that are customers and are familiar, you may have seen this before. With those that aren't, this is the home screen of the VT Writer platform, just to orient you a little bit. You have content creation, text snippets, analyzing documents, analyzing web pages, and then our navigation here on the left. You also can access VT Writer straight in Microsoft Word. So if you're working in Microsoft Word, generating content or editing content, you can use the Word add-in. But for today's example, I'm just going to use the browser version. So I'm going to go into my start writing. This is what I want to do if I want to generate content. So I want to generate new content, leverage our creator mode. So we have two modes here: creator mode, which is where we're going to leverage our LLM, reference our documents, create content, iterate content. And then in our scoring mode, you're going to apply your guardrails there. So be able to jump in and assess grade level, quality, adherence to customer language, adherence to your, internal style guides and language, all of those things. So it gives you a little bit of both. So we're looking at creating content, but then also scoring that content and making sure that it's high quality and relevant. So just to give you an idea what we're looking at. So earlier I talked about the prompt library. So the prompt library is something that is maintained within VT Writer, incredibly effective. But if you are not a VT Writer user, this is something that you could even, like I said, even if it's a personal Excel file, it's a great idea to have a sort of collection of prompts that work well for you in specific situations. If you, like I said, we're going to share some information after that could get you started. If you already have something like that, a great thing to pull prompts from different places that you see or ones that you try that work well, and keep those, and then give yourself the ability to build off of them and strengthen your kind of baseline. So that's what we're seeing here when we look at our prompt library. I have prompts that are already created and they're categorized. So for proposal teams, I have my prompting webinar example here, but proposal prompts for lesson learned, utility, so we want to rephrase and simplify, proofread, all of that. So that's really helpful when we're thinking about folks that may be new to the process, or maybe more inexperienced who can, create a baseline. Additionally, even if you're an experienced prompter, it's much easier to come in, use rephrase prompts, use some of our, proposal prompts instead of just automatically, instead of having to kind of reinvent the wheel every time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we would create. So I have my prompt. This is my comparative prompt. I will quickly from my library, you see the prompting webinar. I have my comparative prompt default, and then I have the prompt. So I'm going to go back to my editor, and I want to select. If I select my prompt from my shortcut here, it will then populate my prompt. So it's our example from earlier. So we're going to analyze the different approaches of VT Docs and VT Writer by referencing the core functionality of each platform. We want to identify similarities and differences and explain how each will address risk identification, acronym management, and content creation. Give an overview of how each platform will address each issue. So essentially, what I want to do is I want to compare the two. I want you to tell me how each is going to address these issues, and then we'll go from there. Now, I could just run this prompt, and based on the general information that's contained within our LLM model, it will give me a result. But I want to make sure that my results are more relevant. So ultimately, the best way to make sure your results are more relevant is to ground them in data. So I'm going to select, instead of just generating and running my prompt, I'm going to select use files. So in use files, I have a couple different options. I can go to SharePoint. So any SharePoint site or any SharePoint folder that I have access to, I could reference that. So if you were creating responses, answering questions, doing any kind of past performance analysis, those types of things, you could go into a SharePoint folder of past performance, use that as reference material when you're doing either research, analysis, content creation. I also can pull local files from my machine, and then I can reference collections. So in preparation for this, I did create the collection that I was going to reference. And what you see in my collections are different pieces. So I have a VTIT folder, I have a product info folder, I have a feature and capabilities folder. Some of these are just timestamped because I was doing specific analysis or specific reference stuff at the time. So if I see my features and capabilities, which is what we're going to use, it will show me what I have in here. So I have a capability statement, our RFP lifecycle, and then some compliance and security features overview. So I want to use this documentation to ground this request. So in my request, I've asked for different approaches and capabilities, functionality of the platforms and how they manage or attack certain processes. So by grounding those in this data, it's going to give me a much more relevant response than if I didn't. So I'm going to press continue. It's going to check permissions. So I can only use files that I have permissions to. If you have a shared environment, it's in another security space. So now I see my prompt, and it's based on this collection. So this is the material I've asked it to consider and prioritize when coming up with the response. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And we have a lot of people on the call, so I'm hoping this goes quickly. If it doesn't, I have saved the response. But generally, anybody who's used these types of platforms knows sometimes the response process can take a little bit when you're first getting started. So ultimately, what we're doing is running this prompt against these documents, and then we will get our response, and then we can insert that information or iterate on the information depending on what we want to do and what we want to address. And also, while we're waiting, I'll just, it's going again. It'll keep going. If not, I did it just before we got on the call because I wasn't sure if having this many people on the call would slow it down too much, but it should generate here in a second. But all of the prompts, and I did have a couple questions in the chat about slides. So we will share the slides after. We will share the prompts after. So all of the prompts that we used, all the example prompts that I showed today, you'll have those as well. So you'll have them in the slides, of course, but then those and then a few other sample and baseline prompts we will add in that file. So you can add those to your prompt library or to wherever you're storing those for reference material. So we'll make sure that you have all of that. And then we have some articles as well that we'll link to on this. Okay. So I think I'm getting slowed down by the fact that I have so many people on the call. So I'm going to do, oh, nope, spoke too soon. I'd run this previously. So generally that goes a little bit quicker, but I have a lot of bandwidth going here. So as you see, the LLM is running, it's using our reference material, and that's what you see in these boxes. So these little boxes that are being generated are our reference bubbles, and at the bottom of this flow, you're going to see the documents that were referenced. So it will show me where it referenced these documents. So I can, if I wanted to, I could make changes right here. I can insert and make changes, but I'm just going to go ahead and insert this so you can see what we've asked for. So I ask for overview. So VT Docs, VT Writer, talking about the overview, talking about the specific pieces. So I address content creation, risk assessment, acronyms, and then similarities, differences, and then a summary. So what we're going to primarily use VT Docs for, what we're going to primarily use VT Writer for, so it's best suited. So like I said in the front end, I didn't ask that question specifically. So I didn't specifically ask to make a recommendation one way or the other, but naturally that was a step when I asked about differences. So it's going to summarize and tell me what is best suited. Now I can iterate on this. I can say, okay, you are talking about VT Writer and how we're going to assess risk. So you said risk identification was not explicitly stated as a core function. I can ask you to expand on this. Now here, addressing acronyms. VT Docs identifies acronyms within documents and flags inconsistencies for review. I'd like to hear more about how you address acronyms and what that looks like. So again, you can then highlight areas, ask for expansion. I'll show you what that looks like. And I'll just highlight this. And I will say, I would like a selection base. So selection base just means that I've made a selection in my document and I want to expand. Please expand on how VT Docs that should take a little less time. I apologize for the slowdown, but my bandwidth is just a little bit smaller than it usually is. But the general idea here is that we are getting a starting point. So we have our prompt. This document is our starting point and our overview, and then we can begin to iterate. So we can begin to dive into specific areas. Now, again, if we're looking at this from a risk perspective, or we're looking at this from a research and analysis perspective, we can keep diving into some of these different areas and expanding upon those, whether that's for research or content creation. It's going to do the same thing. I'm going to jump away from this because I want to make sure that I can answer some questions. I don't want to wait on it, but that's the general idea of what would happen. Is it's just going to give me more context and information. It's going to pull more information because there is more information in my documents. So it's going to pull more information from there and expand on the things that are most important to me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay. So want to quickly just go into kind of final takeaways. So using kind of foundational information and experiment with your own prompts. Again, you'll get copies of all of this after. You can experiment them with on your own sense. We have the baseline prompts, and then you have the larger that were more that I used visible thread information to fill in so you could see what they look like in practice and real world examples. But you can cycle your information into that. So easy to use those as framework and then experiment with them. Always, and I say when we're talking about Gen AI, always think about the responsible and ethical way to use it. Think about your organization's guidelines, the type of information that you're using, and any security concerns you have in place. Always keep that in mind when leveraging different models. Ready to iterate. So you're going to generate content and then we're going to expand upon it. We're going to dive into different areas. You may see ideas that are new. So you may be working through idea generation. You want to expand on those. So there's so much room to keep this as an open dialogue and to look at the system as more of collaborator, not a replacement. And then focus on, better starting points. So we looked at different ways, basic prompts and ways that we can build upon them, ways that we can position them differently. So focus on better starting points and then giving yourself a better jumping off point. So better content creation in the front end means less iteration and less manual work on the back end. So really focus on honing in what you're doing in your requests, and then continue to build your library and work from that. So figure out what works, where you're getting the most consistent responses, where you're leveraging your data most effectively, and try to build from there. So create a strong foundation and then, work up. All right. Well, I have a couple of questions that I'm going to answer, and then we'll go from there. So I had a couple questions about applications on a couple of the prompt types. So application on the comparative prompt that we showed. So comparative prompts, that's more of an analytical. So in-depth analysis, if we're looking at kind of expert level explanation, nuanced scenarios and discussions, domain specific guidance. So looking at comparing two parts that can be internal. So it can be, in the example that I showed, our solution where it's applicable, how it deals with customer concerns, or those can be research-based prompts and ways for you to leverage some of that idea generation, those idea generation aspects as well. Okay. And then I have one more. So a question about using the prompt, like how to manage effectively manage the prompt library. Like I said, that's something in the VT platform that is there, but even if you're managing that to start in Word or Excel, somewhere in your system, anywhere where you can copy paste. So anywhere where you could copy and apply. So copy, paste it in and apply, and then make changes. So make your fields dynamic. What I would recommend is, in some of those examples, I have, company A, B, C, you may have brackets around them, something like that, or have them highlighted so you know where you need to make changes and where you need to enter information to make them more relevant. I would say that's always a good place to start. So as long as it's somewhere you can easily copy from and you have either highlighted, bracketed the information that you want to replace, that's a great place to start, and then you can kind of build from there and create your own library. And I recommend taking notes. In the visible thread section, there are areas where you can do notes or information, but if you're using an Excel, which is what we'll send out after this with those prompts on it, I recommend taking notes, anything that you need to know or anything context that you want to give yourself about previous experiences. It's great to keep a record and great to keep as a reference point as you go. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We're at time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Again, look out for follow-up from us. and then information on upcoming sessions. We have a couple blog posts coming up as well with different prompting types. Another that outlines an additional set. We went through 5 today, but outlines another set of prompt types and best practices. We'll be publishing those throughout the summer. We'll likely have other sessions around prompting and content creation. So we welcome you to follow us on LinkedIn, visit our website. And thank you again for joining us today, and look out for the follow-up information with the slides, recordings, and starter prompt library. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.